Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Stein, co-founder and chief investment officer with Carbon Collective, a climate-focused online investment advisor. Zach is also the author of The Ultimate Guide to Sustainable Investing and joins me to discuss an ETF that provides investors exposure to climate-focused companies. Zach, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks so much for having me, Jill.
Why do you think climate change is the most important issue facing the world today?
It is the issue of our generation. If we do not solve it, the global systems that we have and know and rely upon, from ocean currents to weather patterns, will change. And the status quo of what we have held as being unchangeable will that will also be threatened. So it is an issue that we frankly have no choice but to solve, and we can't do it without changing how we invest.
How do investors get exposure to climate solutions?
Prior to the launch of this fund, CCSO, it was pretty challenging. You could get exposure to renewable energy, you could get exposure to water through those different sector-based funds, but getting exposure to the broader selection of climate solutions, these are the industries that need to massively scale over the coming decades. So from electrification and energy to making our buildings more energy efficient and electrifying them, to electric cars and batteries and sustainable foods, it's far broader than just solar and wind.
What's the methodology of the fund?
We start with ethical screens. We look at what are the leading plans of what it's going to take to solve climate change. We look at independent research from groups like Project Drawdown, the International Energy Agency, and Rewiring America. We say, what industries did they identify that need to massively scale in the coming decades to put us on a path to solving climate change? We can't just negative screen out our way into solving climate change. We have to build. We have to put a lot of solar panels into the ground. So we use that, and then we identify every publicly traded company that generates at least 50% of its revenue. We don't use commitments or forward-looking claims. We just use revenue to identify which companies make it in.
What's an example of one or two companies that are within the fund?
So an example of a climate solution fund is waste management, not one that you'd think of very often, but it's really important that we capture the methane that is emitted from landfills, and waste management is one of the leaders in doing so. Another example would be in the building electrification and energy efficiency space. So we have home insulation companies. Again, a really critical thing, especially as we are electrifying more of our buildings. We need them to be as energy efficient as possible, and that's an industry that is only growing.
Zach, I think it's really interesting that you differentiate the fund by sourcing and finding companies where it's happening with their revenue right now versus projections, because projections are exactly what they are, right? So to be able to see that their revenue sources are being derived from it, I think is quite remarkable. And this might be an obvious question to wrap up here, but what will more investment in climate-focused companies allow them to do?
It allows them to accelerate. When a company has more inflows that it's coming into it, it's able to raise debt more cheaply, and it's able to sell more equity. And that's exactly the type of things these are the companies who are already at some level of scale, and we need them to continue massively scaling while making room for new entrants to be able to solve the most critical issue of our time. It is also the greatest opportunity of our time. Look at things like what Bill Gates and Larry Fink have said, that the next generation of world-changing companies are not going to be coming from digital or tech, they're going to be coming from climate. And until now, there's not been a way to get broad access to that entire basket of companies.
I'm actually going to throw one more question at you. You had mentioned new entrants. Is the barrier to entry high for this particular sector?
Not particularly. In the private space, we're seeing record inflows coming into it. So what's coming down the pike and what's going to be here in 10 years and what the space is going to look like is going to be dramatically different. New technologies like green hydrogen and things that are very exciting are coming within this. So we are seeing each year that we have done this strategy, we've been really excited to see more companies that are making the cut to be able to make it in, that are doing really inspiring work in business models that are massively scalable.
All right, Zach, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.
Thanks, Jill.
All right.